listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 96 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is John Manenti. John is the head coach of the Aussie Sevens women's team and is currently preparing them for the Tokyo Olympics. Before this role, he was the Wallaroos head coach, winning bronze at the 2010 Women's Rugby World Cup. He also coached Eastwood to 3 Shute Shield championships and 1 Australian club championship. It's a pleasure to have him on the show, so welcome, John.
G'day, mate. Good to be here.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks. You're currently living every front rower's dream, coaching a sevens team. What's a bit of your backstory as a player? How did you first get into it, and what got you into the game?
I always thought I had enough skill to be a back, and was wasted in the front row. But I played 1, 2, or 3 my whole life, and I never got to wear double digits.
Yeah.
So that was, and I played, I suppose, 16 years of first grade between West Harbour and Sydney University.
Right.
And then I owned a pub at the time. I'd been, I suppose, 3 or 4 years into the pub when I was at the back end of my career. And I didn't have any great ambition to coach, but I just loved being around, the footy club and things like that. So it was the first gig I did was coaching second grade, which was more as a favour than anything else, and then and because I ran the pub, it was a good way of staying in with the boys to get them to make sure they came back and had a drink after footy, So that worked well, and then from that, I suppose I sort of got a few opportunities. I decided I enjoyed it and wanted to keep doing it, and one of the first opportunities that came up was a role, assistant role with the Wallaroos. Which I wasn't that keen on coaching girls at the time, and I was sort of went, nah, it's not for me. And then the guy who was doing the coach education said to me, he goes, if you he said, if you do this, he said, you'll find it's really good for your development, coaching girls, because you have to be really thorough and you got to be really, it teaches you to coach, every part of the game. You don't assume they know anything. And he said, if you do me a favour, I'll do you a favour, and I'll help you, with some of your coach development stuff. So I said, right. Anyway, he was right. I ended up doing it and loving it, and I suppose went from an assistant coach there to eventually being the head coach in that environment. And then while I was doing that, I started at Eastwood as an assistant coach as well, and the head coach took an opportunity to go overseas, and they offered me that role, and I didn't feel I was ready to be a head coach because I was only been coaching for a year or so, but I sort of took it by default and ended up loving it and having a lot of success at Eastwood, and we won three premierships in a 5-year period there that I was there, basically, and I was very very lucky to have a good bunch of boys, and a real, I suppose at that time, a real community minded club in the sense of they're very much a district club, and we were fighting against, I suppose, the Sydney University that was a powerhouse of rugby in Australia, and they were recruiting the best schoolboys, and they were turning out, Wallabies, I think in 2013, they beat us in the grand final. One of the years we lost, and they beat us by 50 points, but basically the whole team was either a Wallaby or a super player, and we had two. We had 2 fringe players, and that was the group. But, we won in 2011. We won the year after in 14 and 15. So it was good. It was a very special, I suppose, time of my coaching and that, because, like I said, anytime you have success, you have a special bond with players, I suppose, and that was all part of that. So, and I'd sort of been knocking on the door, from, then taking opportunities. I had the Aussie 20s. I've done a few, I sort of feel like I've done a lot in pathways. We have the NRC, which I had the Rams in the NRC. So I'd sort of done most of the pathway programs, and then I was bridesmaid at one of the super to Dan McKellar down at the Brumbies, and ultimately, one of the things that counted against me was I had no professional coaching, I suppose, program experience. So when in 2017, 16, end of 16, 17, when the Sevens came and asked me to get involved as a specialist coach for both the men and the women's, I sort of I jumped on board because it gave me a chance to being in that professional environment, and got to then go to Tokyo, go to Rio with both teams, and I was heavily involved with both programs at that stage, and then obviously the girls won, and then post Rio I became basically a full-time assistant coach to the girls for a couple of years, and then in 2018 I took over after Commonwealth Games when Walshy went over to join to lead the men's program, and I took over the girls program. So that was after the Com Games there.
Right, and it's quite a journey that you've rolled out there, and still more to come, no doubt. Thinking back to those first coaching experiences in second grade club, what were some of the methods you used, and what were some of the early lessons that you realised? Oh, okay, I've got to maybe reflect on this or change this.
Oh, look, the big things was back then I was still a player in my mind. I'd been a player for 16 years, and I spoke to the players like I was just a senior player, like I had been previously, and I suppose there's you learn in time the art of coaching and being able to sort of elevate a group at different stages and lift them when they're flat and get the best out of people, I suppose, and working out. Some people work better with a carrot than a stick, and vice versa. Those were the things in the early days I didn't have any understanding of. Like I said, I was basically a player who probably knew as much as or a couple % more than some of the blokes I was coaching at the time. Funny that Sydney. I mean, the year before I played in the second grade grand final. A bloke called Daniel Halangar, who's went on to be a great player and now turning out to be a very good coach. Daniel put me in for 2 tries under the sticks, and then a year after I was sort of coaching. I was coaching him, in the same team. It was quite strange, But just that art, the art of coaching, and which I'm still learning,
of course.
Like I said, having the knowledge is great, but having the ability to manage people and understanding, how people work differently is something that took me a long time to learn and what motivates people and how you can get the best out of it, and it's still an evolving art, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And what about that dream kind of run there with Eastwood and essentially learning how to win repetitively? What were some of the big takeaways from that real purple patch for the club then?
Well, I mean, look, I'm a real big believer in like consistency. Turning up every day, sort of, was a big part of that, and we were lucky that we didn't have a lot of super players and rep players, which meant back then 20 rounds of the season, 21, 22 rounds. We had the same boys, give or take an injury here or there, and we had combinations, and we had a real bond and an understanding of how we wanted to play the game. And like I said, very rarely did we have too many high-profile players that were away and had to come in late, and we didn't have that sort of stuff to worry about. So we had this group of boys that were a little bit old school. Like, we were probably the only club at the time training 2 nights a week when everyone was training 3 or 4 nights a week. But of course, geographically where we are, we had boys that had moved, who'd grown up as Eastwood kids but had moved out of the area. So they were driving 45, 50 minutes to come to training, and it sort of seemed like it was silly to make them come in and almost punish them to travel that far every night just to come and have a half-baked session. So I made deals with the boys and said, we'll train 2 nights a week. We train hard. You've got to do a lot of your work on your own, like your conditioning work. We're not going to come here to run around the park together. We're going to come here to do our footy stuff. And I got them to buy on how I wanted to play the game. And obviously being a forward, very much forward dominant, but but they got to be creative too. They didn't just play. They wasn't just bash and barge. They all got to be they all got to play footy and play with the ball in hand, which they love doing. And and we set up our I suppose our style or our game model that we love to play, and team. Everyone knew what we were doing. It was just whether they could stop us or not. And I suppose we the 2011 team was an amazingly talented team, which, like I said, won in spite of me, or I had very little to do with the amount of, it was just one of those rare teams that, nearly everyone in that team went on to play pro rugby around the world somewhere.
Yeah.
Nick White, current Wallaby halfback, was a halfback at the age of, I don't know, well, he would have been 19 at the time, and Holler, 4 World Cups for Tonga, like he was my 10, and just a incredibly talented team across the whole park, and that was we won 24 out of 25 games that season. We lost one game, and that was my first full season of coaching. So it was an excellent start. But like I said, I was blessed with the squad I had. 2014 and 15 were different because we didn't have a lot of those, big names, or a lot of those guys had moved and travelled and started playing around the world. Sione Picala in France, and Mitch Lees in England, and all over the place. The team, Lockie McCaffrey moved on to Super Rugby. Fitzpatrick was gone. So it became a very different, proposition. But we really learnt the art of drafting and just turning up every day. And what I loved about what we got out of the group was there was very little difference between a good day and a bad day. Our performance levels were right in the slot where we need to be. And like I said, a bad day we were never far off the mark. Even on a bad day, we didn't suffer big defeats. We lost. We win bonus points. So, I think even in 2013 when we lost the grand final, we were minor premiers by a landslide. We just lost a couple of games on we lost the grand final that year. I think 2012 we were the same. We were minor premiers, but we lost 2 on the bounce in the semi-finals, which we hadn't lost. We hadn't lost 2 games in a row. I think through that 5-year period, we never lost 2 games in a row, except for that year in 2012. So, really consistent side. Just knew their roles, knew how to grind a wind out, and then as we developed and as blokes would retire or get injured or move on, we just had a really good depth just rolling in. So every year we had 3 or 4, 5 changes each year, but they'd done their time in the lower grades and were ready to step up.
And how did you profile the team differently that 2011 to the 2014? The playing style was similar, or with the team you had?
The playing style was well, we'd evolved a bit around. I suppose I'd started. 2011 was I suppose I'd taken over from Billy Melrose, and we continued with, I suppose, a lot of the setups and stuff that he'd sort of introduced in 2010 that I continued through to the back half of 2010 when I took over from him, and then into 11. Whereas by 2014-15, when I say we involved somewhat, we'd got some different players in. We're big ball carrying forward, Jared Barry and blokes like that. That we had a couple of really good ball runners. So we were able to change that game to be a very, very forward dominant game. And then I was lucky that the current Eastwood coach, Ben Batcher, was my fullback, who was, as good as anyone at, understanding space and really what I challenged him on was, like always trying to play to space. And he was probably the best, as good as anyone I've seen at it, and so while our forwards were rumbling away, he'd just pick his moments to strike or bounce back on the short side and come in and really set us up well.
Cool. And how about that transition to sevens? You came in initially as like a consultant, those kind of things. What was the first couple of days on the job like? What were some of the things that you really?
It was easy. It was easy at the start because it was all scrum, line out, breakdown. So
bread and butter.
As the first I'll say 18 months while I was involved leading into Rio 2016, it was all my stuff that I do, just in a different thing. What funny teaching backs how to scrummage, and and even then I was using principles in 15, which now that we don't, now that I've been around sevens long enough, like a lot of the principles aren't actually the same because you're not transferring weight with the scrum and all those things. But initially I was still using a lot of old school scrum techniques, and then I suppose I started learning more about the game, and I was very lucky to have Walshy as the head coach there, and then Andy Friend eventually with the men. So I got to learn a lot about the game from those guys, and I suppose you're just in the room, you're absorbing all the time like the players. I was no different. I was learning, I was learning on the run a little bit as well. But ultimately, the biggest transition, I suppose, was one that I'd had some experience with. Obviously, being involved with the girls was the men to women, and being able to understand the difference in coaching, coaching the girls to the guys, and how that there is some huge differences, and yet there's a lot of similarities, and ultimately the girls want to be treated as footy players.
Yeah,
they don't want to be treated differently, but but how you talk to them, how the feedback to them, they crave feedback much more so than guys do. They want to know the detail they need is much more. Because they haven't been, their game age is not like the guys. A lot of the girls haven't, in our case, a lot of the girls haven't started playing rugby till 2 or 3 years before they're here with me. You know what I mean? So, things that we might have picked up as 10-year-olds running around the park playing, and just know, I suppose, even laws of the game. Like you're always being challenged around making sure they understand. Like I'll say something and then I'll go, "You guys know that, right?" Like they're like, "No, didn't know that," and it's because then you sort of look at someone and go, "Well, I suppose she was playing touch footy 18 months ago, and she's only been playing a few years, so she wouldn't know it." So it challenges you around things, differently. And then there's obviously girls are way more emotive than guys, so when they're up or they're down, or they're upset or there's something not right. You learn the balances of that. So as much as changing from 15s to 7s, there was also I suppose the shift of the boys and the girls, which was all part of, I suppose, my transition as well. But ultimately, I suppose sevens is like every school you have in 15s you need in 7s, but you're under the spotlight a lot more in 7s because there's more space around you. It happens faster, and if you get it wrong, the consequences are greater. So it definitely challenges you to be a coach. And I've said to a lot of people since, if you want to keep progressing in coaching, give yourself the challenge and coach some 7s for 6 months, or take your club and do some 7s with them, because like I said, all your skills that you're doing in 15s are all there. They're just highlighted, under more intensity, more scrutiny.
Yeah. Or coach under 7s as well. That'll also test your coaching.
Under 7s, very much the same.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I've got three boys, and I've never been able to coach them in rugby for mainly because I'm normally too busy doing what I do. But I also take note of all the people that did coach them, because I tell you what, it's a challenge coaching those kids.
No, and it just raises a really good point around coaches should be looking for diversity in what they're doing. Like I coach my son under 5 soccer. I coach my girls 2 different rugby teams. I coach women's rugby. I coach men's rugby. I've coached 7s, and I just think, like you said, every experience offers you something more in the toolkit for further down the track.
Without question.
Yeah, cool.
Question. Really good part of getting balance and perspective, I reckon.
Spot on. Well, Tokyo's coming up soon. How have the preparations been going for that so far, and what are some of the kind of, I know with the COVID situation in Australia, there's challenges there, but also in terms of how do you manage training volume and training load as you build up to such a big tournament?
Well, I suppose a couple parts to it. I mean, there's been various parts of the challenge. I mean, one of them, the biggest one being the postponement, obviously was huge. So if we rewind 12 months and we were going into this Olympics now, I'd probably have 3 or 4 players that would be playing that aren't going to be playing this Olympics for various reasons. One's decided she wasn't going to go on and when started her family. A couple have been forced retirements on the back of injury. So there's quite a bit has changed in our world, and I suppose the problem is from 2018 and 19 and 20, I was preparing those girls for Tokyo, and then when 20 gets cancelled, and then I have a couple of attritional injuries and things that happen. Like I said, so we haven't had the tournaments we have, so we had a lot of we've had a lot of turnover of players without getting them the exposure that you'd normally have in a normal World Series year. So effectively, our last proper tournament was in February 2020, start of 20.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, 2020. And we played last week. We played an Oceania tournament against New Zealand and Fiji, which was our first proper tournament sort of format for them. For like almost over a year. You know what I mean? So it's been really hard to give these young girls the exposure that they needed and time, in the games. We've had a lot of internal hit outs and we've obviously trained the house down and all those things, but there's nothing like playing footy to actually replicate that, So that were the real challenges around that is working out who was next in line, who were the right players to bring in and grooming them and obviously giving them opportunities, all of them, and even the girls that haven't made it, giving them opportunities to put their best foot forward. So that was the first part of the challenge and all the question. The second part around volumes and things, we pushed pretty hard through COVID and got a lot of gains a long way out. And then now we're starting to really manage our time on the field. Making sure we're really sharp and trying to keep field sessions. Obviously we're still training, 3 or 4 times a week on field, but trying to keep it to an hour on field. So we're really starting to making sure that everything's happening with intensity, less time on feet, and not going through the grind so much as being explosive when we do stuff and trying to make it punchy. So that I suppose is starting to replicate and I can see them starting to sharpen up now. It's taken a while because we haven't really been, tapering at all. We didn't taper for the tournament, but we've kept pushing through those phases, and now we're just starting to back off a bit. And I'm seeing them, finding a bit of extra, energy and I suppose intensity around their training now.
Oh, cool. No, that stuff's really interesting, and it's a juggling act for sure. And what about the approach coming in as you're in a unique position, being the first team to win it ever in Rio? What's the kind of mindset around that going into the tournament?
I suppose I was driving it quite hard post the postponement that no team has ever won back-to-back gold medals on the first on an inaugural medal, if you know what I mean. So
right.
Some teams won back-to-back from 20 to 20. For 2000 and 2004, but not when it was the first time. So rugby was the first time at the Olympics in 2016, and no teams managed to do that. And I was sort of driving that as a real motivator around, like we can be the first. We can be the first team to do this. You know what I mean? In any sport, But just the postponement of the Olympics and the fact that we lost, like I said, 4 or 5 girls that were going to be in the from the previous Olympics. Once we started losing those, it becomes less of a I suppose, the more time it dilutes it, if you know what I mean. So obviously, I'm not going to hide behind the fact that New Zealand have been the form team pretty much since we won gold in 2016. New Zealand have hardly lost a game, and they've been outstanding. So there's I don't think anyone in the sevens was expecting them not to be going into the team as high price favourite sort of thing, But but it comes with challenges, and we know now that we get close, there's going to be a lot of questions around. We won gold, are we going to win it again, and all that sort of stuff. And ultimately, I'm trying to keep the girls grounded around the fact that, we don't really know where we are in the world standings at the moment because we've played New Zealand recently and come second. So, we know we're not ahead of them at the moment, and where we are with everyone else, we don't know because we haven't played each other for 12 months. So, if you're measuring yourself against the Kiwis, we're going to have to keep lifting and keep improving, through the Olympics to better them. But like all things, every performance they go without a loss might suggest they get closer to it too. So, we just got to keep doing our thing and worrying about us. And we for whatever rhyme or reason, we might have to meet them, and they might lose a game they're not supposed to lose, or we might lose a game we're not supposed to lose, and we might see each other. So we can't get too stressed about, I suppose, them. We just need to worry about us. And like I said, I've got a very young side. I've got 5 girls with Olympic experience, which is great, and then I've got a lot of young girls there as well. So it's a new team. I'm I'm not loading them up with expectations of history and all that stuff. It will build and it will be there. But I suppose the good thing about being being for us being in Japan without crowds and those sorts of things, it actually takes a lot of the emotion of that sort of stuff away from the contest. And even our first game's Japan against Japan, and if they had a full house of Japanese people only, which was originally the plan, we might have been ambushed, with a bloody big crowd and all that sort of stuff. But that's gone from the picture now, which is probably not a bad thing for us.
Yeah. Great. All right. And, COVID adds some interesting things, especially around travel and just travel in general with things like jet lag and managing that. What are some of the strategies you and the team have put in place there?
We're not too bad because we're only 2 hours difference for us to Japan. So
of course.
It's not a massive shift for us.
Yeah.
Like obviously, for some people coming, obviously, if they're coming from your part of the world, it'd be fairly significant,
Yeah.
But it's not a huge shift for us. We're on a daytime flight over there, that also changes things a bit because by the time we get there, we've got to do tests once we land.
Yeah.
We've got to do a test before we can leave the airport. A COVID test. We do this week. We've got. We had a test yesterday. I think we've got one at 96 hours and one at 72 hours. So we've got testing right up to when we go, and then before we get off the plane or before we leave the airport, we have to have another test. So. We'll probably leave here about 8. Our flight's about 8 in the morning, and we're anticipating we'll get to our village by just before midnight. So hopefully everyone will be tired and we'll get a decent night's sleep in, and the next day we'll let them sleep and just sort of try and take it easy that first day. And hopefully, like I said, with only a 2-hour adjustment, it won't impact them too heavily. So hopefully by 48 hours. We should be climatised to. Oh, sorry, time-wise, we should be right. Climatise another story because the heat, the humidity is going to be excessive.
Yeah, for sure. And what about you as a coach? That coaching sevens, it's a different format, obviously, than 15s, and it's pretty highs and lows and gaps in the schedule and those kind of things. So what do you do in terms of preparing the leading up to a tournament, say the 24 hours before or 48 hours before to make sure you're at your best?
I suppose when we have our pool games are quite easily organised in the sense that we know them. We know we've got Japan, China, and USA. We know exactly how that's going to pan out for the first 3 games. I suppose what I have to make sure I'm up to speed on is what comes next. We could obviously have, and depending on whether we finish first or second in our pool or third, but obviously I'm hoping to. If you top your pool, you go into one half of the draw. If you come second in your pool, you go in another half of the draw. Looking at all the potential teams that we can meet, and then ultimately on the day we've got 4 hours between or 5 hours between our first game and our second. Or game 3 is USA, and that will determine where we finish in our pool, and then that'll give me 5 hours to prepare for the next game we play, which is basically a knockout quarter final. So, I have to make sure that I've got all the permutations, every possible team we're going to play prepared, so that when that result comes in, I can go right. We're playing Great Britain, or we're playing Russia, or we're playing whoever it is, and here's how we're going to play them. Here's how we're going to beat them. We've drip fed that a bit to the girls, but I don't need to give them 10 game plans for 10 different teams until we know, in detail who they're going to be. So, of course, we've played them in some cases regularly over the years. We know them, but that's my job to make sure that I've got everything ready to go. So soon as it becomes evident who we're playing, the girls have then got 4 or 5 hours to go, right, that's right. Well, this is how we're playing it. Refresher, some vision. I do a PowerPoint on each team, so they talk about how we want to attack, how they're going to attack, how we're going to defend, all those things. There's not major changes in anything, but every team has their own little way of doing things, and we need to be prepared to counter that.
Right, awesome. Coaching's a pretty full on profession, even if you're at the amateur level. It does occupy a lot of the mental bandwidth, whether you're in competition or out of competition. What are some of your strategies that you do, to switch off and to disconnect from the day to day and make sure you're in mentally in a good space?
I'm very lucky. I've got 4 kids that are all fairly active in sport. I go home and I try never. I won't say it's never, but I try very rarely to talk shop or talk footy. And even even now, there's like the Wallabies played last night, and I watch it with my kids as a fan, not analysing it. And they'll say to me, "Oh, what would you have done there?" I'm like, just enjoy I'm just enjoying the game. I'm just enjoying watching with the kids. But the older two they're all cricketers, and so my oldest boy he's played with the Sydney Sixers. I don't know if you follow the cricket.
Yeah, of course.
The Sixers. So the older two play first grade cricket together. So I'm a cricket tragic. I love spending weekends. I'd happily spend every Saturday and Sunday watching cricket being played. Certainly through the summer months when there's no rugby happening. I'm a tragic. So, but I love just spending time at home with them and just being around the family. I'm not a golfer. I love riding a watt bike. I love getting on the bike. I don't like riding on the road. I'm pretty sure I'm too big a target. Someone's going to clean me up. So I get on the watt bike and I ride nearly every day on the watt bike as my sort of release or energy burn.
Yeah.
But other than that, mate, like I said, just love spending time with the family.
And what about at the Olympics? What's the strategy there from day to day during competition?
Mate, it's going to be quite
do the same kind of thing.
Mate, we can't really get out because of COVID.
Of course.
If anyone gets anything, we're going to be pretty much stuffed from the point of view that they're all going to be close contacts. If somebody gets it, so mate, it is literally going to be life in a bubble. It's going to be trained.
Yeah,
and we're even got to be careful in the villages per se, because obviously not every athlete is going to be as in other countries. Australia will be very good, but not every country is going to be as strict and as harsh as we are. Player X could go downtown Tokyo to have a look around and do some sightseeing or something and catch something and bring it back into the village, and next thing you know, you're unlucky bloke sitting in the queue behind him at dinner, and what I mean, like it can happen. So we just got to be really strict on ourselves, and like I said, it'll be Rio was great. We were out and about, at Copacabana Beach, and checking out the town and all that sort of stuff. But we're not going to have those luxuries this time. It's going to be very Olympics from that point of view, and so managing our time. I'm assuming there'll be a lot of cards being played. And a few board games and different things, because like I said, we're going to go to training, we're going to come back and we're going to be hanging around our rooms a bit, so it's going to be a fairly quiet sort of time,
What's your euchre skills like?
I'm not great at euchre, but like I said, there's a few games the girls play which they've taught me, and I'm starting to get the hang of it. So I'm hoping to win a few hands when we go away.
Perfect. All right. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. First question, when you were a kid growing up and you first kind of fell in love with the game of rugby, who were some of the players that jumped out at you?
Oh, mate, for me, front row, Tommy. I love Tommy Lawton, who was Australian hooker. He was a big bloke, I suppose, like me, and mate, he was somebody I loved watching play. And a bloke that I ended up playing with was Topo Rodriguez, who was a prop.
Of course.
Prop that I actually my first year of grade, first year of grade footy, he was sort of getting towards the end of it, and I debuted against him, and I remember him saying to me, what do you hear? You should be in nappies. I was an 18-year-old and he was 36 or something, and he put my head up my backside a few times. But they were sort of for me, front rowers were always important role models, I suppose, for me. And cool. Then mate, anyone who could sort of carry along from other countries, watching blokes like obviously Jonah Lehman and those guys were just unbelievable.
Yeah, 100%. And what about now? Who are some of the players going around on the world stage you like watching?
Mate, I enjoy, like I said, I enjoy watching. I suppose it's different now because I'm coaching and I'm around the guys, so I like to follow, I suppose, people that you've been around or involved with in some capacity. But I'm enjoying watching Taniela Tupu come along.
Yeah,
like I said,
100%.
He's a real character.
Yeah.
Mate, like I said, we sometimes get a bit bland around the sport, and we forget how important it is just to be yourself. But he's a big guy that can carry and put some shots on, and like I said, really enjoys his footy, and it's hard not to like like him. I know, some people say he should be, working harder and all those things. It's like, at the end of the day, he's a point of difference. He's an X factor front row, which you don't get very often. And I'm enjoying certainly what he's bringing. There's obviously there's a really good young breed of Wallabies coming through, the system. At the moment, and I think Harry Wilson, like the number 8, looks like a real find for Australian rugby. So it's like I said, it's exciting. It's an exciting time because they've sort of got this young group that can really go somewhere together if they stick together. So
you raise a good point about Tupa. I think a lot of coaches are keen to coach the creativity out of players, whether they do it consciously or not, most likely unconsciously. But guys like that are rare, and you just got to let them go, and with a few
parameters.
Exactly.
But I mean, he'll he will he'll, as he gets older and more experienced, he'll work out what his parameters are himself too. But at the moment, like I said, he's got some X factor in him and ability to. To make a difference in the scrum with the ball in your hand or defensively, and I think they're the kind of players that like I said, you want to be giving them opportunities to grow.
100%. All right. Third question: what about coaches? Who are some of the high-profile coaches going around that you like how they do things?
Mate, I was very lucky to be coached by 2 really good guys in. I played in Italy for 3 years. At Benetton, and I got coached by a French coach called Pierre Villepré.
Oh yeah, legend.
Pierre Villepré, absolute legend. He taught me so much about attacking football, playing space. That was his sort of biggest thing, was play to space.
Not much on defence, all attack.
Not much on defence. Taught me a bit about ducking and ducking punches too. My first game, I got my nose bent in half by someone who punched me, and he gave me a few lessons afterwards. He said, "You have to smell the fight." I said, "What?" He said, "You have to smell the fight before he throws it. You've got to be ready for it." Okay, but he was brilliant. And then after him was Wayne Smith, the All Black flame. And I had Wayne for a couple of years over there, and obviously that was before he went on to become basically the coaching guru, and it was just I wish I had my time again with Wayne, because we used to sit together at the dinner table, I'll say 3 or 4 nights a week, and have a chat. Obviously, the fact we're speaking English made it easier than, obviously their teams, and we both became fluent in the team. But he'd sit there at the table and he'd talk with salt and pepper shakers on the move, and there was always a back line, and there was always something happening. And if you ran this and that, and he was such a rugby nuffy, I suppose. That just loved talking footy and as a 19, 20, 21-year-old that I was when I was there, like I said, I don't think I appreciated what, like I said, I'd kill for that time again to be able to drain that information out. I was probably thinking about when's the coach going to stop talking to me so I can go and have a beer or something, but certainly like 2 guys that had a huge impact on me, and obviously, both have been, legends of the game coaching-wise.
Yeah, I had Pierre Villepré on the show, probably 15 episodes ago, and that was like a big check mark for me. I'd been trying to get him on for a while, and what a mind around playing the game, especially in terms of attack. It's something that all coaches should look at, what he did, and that 99 French team, he was the assistant coach there, and how they played. It's a special way of playing.
Some really simple philosophies, which again, I suppose I tried to take some of those things, later on when I was coaching, and just sort of think, people just think it was so easy, just bloody catch and pass effectively. We all played, the tip balls and stuff now, but he was doing that. He was doing that in 1990, mate. He was bloody teaching forwards to tip ball when it wasn't a done thing. You know what I mean? And he was so far ahead of his time. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, and final question: who's someone in the grassroots out there coaching who you feel deserves some recognition and a shout out?
There's probably a heap of them. I suppose I've worked closely with Ben Batcher, who's now the head coach at Eastwood. He's doing his time. He's really investing himself into the art of coaching. He's getting the technical side of things, and he's still making sure it's enjoyable. I think it's and again, I'm biased because I've had something to do with him. I'm sure there's a boatload of young coaches out there that are going around, but this guy's 3 or 4 years into his career, and somebody I can see being a career coach and doing very well for himself. And I suppose I've been fortunate enough to sort of have him do a little bit of time with me, but he's gone out on his own 2 feet and doing a great job on his own now. And he's one definitely that I think that we'll hear more of down the track.
Awesome. Great to hear. All right. Cheers, John. I've really enjoyed the chat. All the best with Tokyo and, the final prep. And as a fan of Aussie rugby, I'll be watching really closely and cheering the girls on. And good luck in the tournament.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.